I would like to say welcome to webinar series with top international researchers hosted by Journal Development and Scientific Publication Center, Universitas Airlangga. Universitas Airlangga is one of the best education institution in the eastern part of Indonesia. To increase the position in the world-class university ranking, Universitas Airlangga support their staff and students to develop their research and scientific publication. So that's why today in the third webinar series, we would like to discuss about qualitative and mixed methods to health sciences research. Before we start, I would like to remind to all participants, if you have any questions during the presentations, please put your question up on the chat box and we will discuss later on Q&A sessions. Moving on to our main event, today we have two speakers. The first speaker is from our university. Her name is Dini Setiawati. And the second speaker, we have our guest speaker is from Flinders University. His name is Professor Paul Ward. Let me introduce our distinguished speakers today. The first is, wait a minute, I would like to share screen their photo before. Okay, our first speaker is Dini Setiawati, DDS, MPH, PhD. Welcome for this session, Doctor. She is a lecturer from Department of Dental Public Health, Faculty of Dental Medicine, Universitas Airlangga. She has graduated the bachelor degree in 2007 from Universitas Airlangga and her master degree in 2011 and doctoral degree in 2019 from Flinders University, Australia. And her research interests are oral epidemiology, oral health surveillance, health inequalities, quantitative and qualitative research, and also mixed method research. Since 2011, she is a member of Golden Key International Honor Society. And for the next speaker, allow me to introduce him. Our second speaker is Professor Paul Ward. Welcome to this webinar, Professor. Professor Paul Ward is a social scientist with a background in medical sociology, qualitative research. His research interest is professional perception, knowledge and understanding of health, healthcare, medicine, risk and trust. And also he is an editor and reviewer in some prestigious international journals, such as BMC Public Health or International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. He has published a lot of articles, 209 articles, 13 editorials, and 15 book chapters. It's a lucky for us to have both of you today. And that's all for our introduction to our speakers today. Moving on to our main event. I would like to give the first opportunity to Dr. Dini Setiawati. Dr. Dini Setiawati will explain all about qualitative research. So if you have any question about qualitative research during her presentation, please write your question in the chat box. Okay, Dr. Dini Setiawati, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Aka. Let me share my PowerPoint first. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Aka. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. In health sciences, researchers are commonly more comfortable with quantitative research than qualitative research, right? Typically, we will say quantitative research if it's about numbers. or quantifications of a phenomenon that need statistical representation. And we will say qualitative research if it's about words that describe a phenomenon. The phenomenon cannot be measured using numbers as in quantitative research. This means that qualitative research aims to provide a deep understanding of how people perceive the phenomenon, and qualitative research. What I want to say here is that I would like to highlight that qualitative research differ from quantitative research. Okay, so in today's webinar, I would like to provide an overview of qualitative research that may be useful for the researcher, particularly in health sciences. Here's the topic that I would like to share today. Because of time restriction, I'm not gonna cover everything in detail about these topics, but I'm gonna provide an overview so that you may have an idea what qualitative research is about and why qualitative research is important to be carried out in health science research. Because as far as I know, although it's important, qualitative research receives only very little attention in health sciences. So far, most work on health sciences, particularly in Indonesia, falls within quantitative approach. In my field of study, I'm from dentistry, from dental public health department. Qualitative approach in dental public health research is very rare. So for today's presentation, I will start with what is qualitative research. Then I will briefly show you some differences between quantitative and qualitative research and when we should consider using qualitative research. I will also provide overview of qualitative research design, sampling and methods, as well as types of data obtained in qualitative research. Lastly, I will briefly talk about how to handle qualitative data and data analysis. Okay, let's start with the first topic. What is qualitative research? Actually, there are a lot of definitions provided in the literature about qualitative research, but basically, qualitative research is an approach to a scientific inquiry that uses non-numerical data. That means it's not about number to uncover and understand people's perception, beliefs, values, motivation, experiences, attitudes, behaviors, and interaction with reference to a particular topic. So it's not about a number. Qualitative inquiry is the way to frame and address questions that cannot be answered by way of quantification in quantitative research. For example, health behavior. Health behavior is a complex construct, and it's difficult to understand what people think and perceive so that they perform that particular behavior. We can only be able to understand by personally interacting with people who experience the issue and understand why they do. So qualitative research will allow participants to speak from their own perspective. Here, I'm not saying that qualitative is better than quantitative research, but what I would like to highlight here that both quantitative and qualitative research have strengths and weaknesses. Quantitative researchers incorporate contextual variables in their models, but they conceptualize abstractly, still abstract, while qualitative researchers are well positioned to open this black box. So just focus on research question and the aim of the study to decide whether quantitative or qualitative research approach is appropriate to address the research questions. If we want to explore to get novel insights about a particular issue, we may need qualitative research because qualitative research is not only about what people think, but also why they think so, or even how they take decision about something. For example, if we want to find out why people behave the way they do, how opinion and attitude are formed, how people are affected by a particular event that go on around them, how and why cultures have developed, or specifically why patients do not comply with treatment prescribed. how people choose or decide to visit a particular health services, we can use qualitative research. Qualitative research in this case will be more suitable than quantitative research because we can't understand this topic using quantification, using number. It will be more useful if you use qualitative research. We contact with the participant or people who experience the issue or phenomena, and we talk with them, we discuss with them, and we explore until we have a better understanding about the topic of our interest. Okay. This is some differences between quantitative and qualitative research. First, both quantitative and qualitative research approaches are guided by philosophical assumptions. Here, positivism represent quantitative studies and interpretivism represent qualitative studies. Positivism emphasizes on absolute truth using exact measurements. It concerns with how the phenomenon of interest are interpreted, understood, experienced, produced, or constituted. The researcher used a deductive approach to test the proposed theory or to test hypothesis in quantitative research using positivism. While in qualitative research, the researcher used interpretivism as a paradigm, and they use inductive approach to generate theory. So it's from qualitative research, they use interpretivism and use inductive approach to generate theory. Interpretivism concerns with how the phenomena of interest are interpreted, understood, experienced, produced, or constituted. The researcher used an inductive approach to let the data speak to generate theory from general to the details. And the second one, the quantitative research concerns with discovering facts or characteristics about a particular phenomena by statistically testing hypotheses about the phenomena. Qualitative research, on the other hand, concerns with understanding human behaviors or experiences, beliefs, feelings from the informant perspective. Third, quantitative research generates numerical data or number. Data are collected through measuring things, assigning numerical value to responses, counting occurrence, such as prevalence, frequency, incidence, and so on, while qualitative research produces textual data or words. Data in qualitative research are collected through participant observation and interview using audio or video recordings and field notes. Fourth is related to research methods and instruments used for data collection. Quantitative research is highly structured and rigid. The researchers ask all participants identical questions in the same order. The response category from which participant may choose are closed-ended or fixed. But on the other hand, qualitative research is semi-structured and flexible. Participant response affect how and which questions researchers ask next. Qualitative methods ask mostly open-ended questions that are not necessarily worded in exactly the same way with each participant. With open-ended questions, participants are free to respond in their own words, and these responses tend to be more complex than simply yes or no answer. The relationship between the researcher and the participant is often less formal than in quantitative research. Participants have the opportunity to respond more elaborately and in greater detail than with quantitative methods. The researcher has the opportunity to respond immediately to what participants say by asking subsequent questions to information the participant has provided. This allows for in-depth and further probing and questioning of participants' answer or responses. Next, fifth, quantitative research needs more samples than qualitative research to achieve representativeness, and this representativeness is not the purpose of qualitative research. As qualitative research aims to gain a deep understanding about a phenomena from the perspective of people who experience it. And six, in quantitative research, the data is statistically analyzed to uncover patterns and make inference. But in qualitative research, despite using a relatively small number of participants, qualitative research produces a large amount of detailed information that result in rich understanding and provide insight into the problem and helps to develop an idea about how to solve the problems. So when we should consider using qualitative research, basically researchers make use of qualitative research technique when they need to capture in-depth insight. Some use qualitative methods exclusively or stands on their own. Some use to complement or extend quantitative findings, and others use to generate hypotheses, theory for future quantitative study. We may want to explore a phenomenon that has not been studied before. For example, because of its complexity and difficulty to study, or we may want to add rich detail to gain better understanding because maybe it's well studied quantitatively, but not well understood, or to understand phenomena that are difficult to capture quantitatively. When we choose a particular research approach, we should also match with research design and methods. There are 5 common qualitative research design. First is narrative, phenomenology, ethnography, grounded theory, and case study. Basically, narrative is like telling a story about individual life. Well, phenomenology study a phenomenon. It can be an event, a situation, or an experience, or a concept. The purpose is to raise awareness or increase insight or understanding about the phenomenon of interest. Ethnography is also known as portrait of people. Ethnography studies culture and people in their natural setting. Instead of relying on interview and discussion, the researcher experiences the natural settings firsthand, so they do field work. The researcher needs to adapt to participants' environments, including they have to be familiar with social norms and their language as well. It can last from a few days to a few years. In ground theory, the aim is to develop a new theory. The explanation about a phenomenon are genuinely new knowledge and are used to develop theories. Case study aims to provide in-depth understanding of a single or multiple cases. It can be a single patient, a practice, or a healthcare system. For example, case study about health service delivery, development of new health services, or program evaluation. Case study often involve the use of multiple methods for collecting data. So in case study, you may use interview. You also may use observe document or observe people behavior and so on. So they use multiple methods for data collection. And then the study research objective and the characteristic of the study population determine which and how many people to select. There are 3 most common sampling methods used in qualitative research. They are purposive sampling, quota sampling, and snowball sampling. Purposive sampling is based on pre-selected criteria relevant to a particular research questions. If we want to know the perception of the quality of health services, we need to select individuals who have received those services. In quota sampling, we decide while designing the study how many people we will include in the study. So we decide in advance. Snowball sampling is also often used to find and recruit hidden population, that is group that are not easily accessible to researcher. I have an experience about snowball sampling recently. I have to approach people who use miswak for toothbrushing. I have this project with my students, and at the first time, I think that it will be easy for us, to find people who use siwak or miswak to brush their teeth, because some Muslim community use siwak as a tool for toothbrushing. But when the project has run, we found it very difficult to find people who use miswak or siwak as toothbrushing, as a tool for toothbrushing. That's why in the beginning I set my project with purposive sampling, because I choose people who have experience of using miswak as a tool for toothbrushing. But then in the process of the project, I changed the sampling technique into snowball sampling. So I got one person who used miswak, and then I asked her to introduce someone else who also used miswak. That's one of the examples. The qualitative research is flexible in design. Like quantitative research is also empirical research. This means that qualitative research also use evidence to gain knowledge as the research outcomes. There are three most common methods for collecting evidence or data in qualitative research. They are in-depth interview, focus group discussion, and observation. First, I would like to briefly discuss about in-depth interview. In-depth interview, or one-on-one interview or personal interview, is one of the most common qualitative research methods. One of the advantages of this method is that it provides a great opportunity to gather precise data about what people think and why they think so. This interview can be performed face-to-face or on the phone, and usually lasts between half an hour or even 2 hours or more. But for me, I usually interview people and last at least 45 minutes, and even 1 hour or more than 1 hour. When one-on-one interview is conducted face-to-face, it also gives the opportunity to read the body language of the respondent and match the responses. So in this situation, when we experience COVID-19 pandemic, it will be hard for us to meet people in person just to do interview, face-to-face interview. What I do during this pandemic situation, I suggest people who are interested in doing qualitative research using interview to have a video call, interview using video call. You can use a WhatsApp video call, a Line, or even Zoom, like we do today, or other application. And focus group discussion are another commonly used qualitative research methods. The ideal size of a focus group is usually between 5 and 8 participants. If the topic is of minor concern to participants, and if they have little experience with the topic, then a group size of 10 could be productive. As the topic becomes more important, if people have more expertise on the topic, or if they are likely to have strong feelings about the topic, then the group size should be restricted to 5 or 6 people. Members of each group should have something in common. Members of each group should have something in common. we need to have several focus group discussions. So don't rely on the view of just one group. Observation is usually used to verify information collected through other methods. We can simply use written description or use video recording, photographs, or written documents. For example, if we study about why children consume sweet snacks, we can verify the information we get from interview with parents or with the children themselves. We can match with what we see or we observe in the children's social environment, such as the presence of food stalls or the culture of sweets consumption in their social environment and so on. Regarding the types of data, there will be handwritten notes or audio or video recorded data. If there are recording, we should transcribe the recording data before the data analysis starts. If there are field notes taken, they are helpful in maintaining comments, environmental context, non-verbal cues, and so on. And it can be compared while transcribing audio recorded data. Qualitative researchers typically gather multiple forms of data rather than rely on a single data sources. Because usually if we conduct interview, face-to-face interview with our informants or participants, we usually not just interview the participant. We usually also observe the environment surrounding the participants. Like what I have said before, like there's a food stall, about the culture in their social environment, or anything else when we can see during the interview. How to handle quantitative research data? First, we need an audio or video recording. Then we need to transcribe to produce a written version of interview. After that, we need to pay attention to tone and inflection by listening and noting the intensity and feeling in the interviewee's voice to detect positive or negative feeling, certainty or uncertainty, enthusiasm or reluctance, and so on. At last, we should perform constant comparison as data collection and analysis. It should be occur on ongoing basis. Each interview we should analyze before other interview take place, because funding of first interview is incorporated in the following one. There are several data analysis techniques in qualitative research, such as narrative analysis, discourse analysis, content analysis, thematic analysis, and so on. But today I'm not going to discuss in detail for each technique. We can analyze qualitative data using the software. There are some well-known software package for qualitative research, but it's different with the quantitative research software package. If we are not dealing with large amount of data analysis can all be done manually. So it's not compulsory for us to use the software package, but the software package, in my opinion, in my experience, it helps us to organize the data when we analyze the data themselves. Basically, what we will do in data analysis is summarizing data and presenting the result to show the important features. First, we label or code each piece of data. It can be idea, concept, and so on. We can start with a summary of the text, then we compare codes, looking for consistency, differences, patterns, and so on. We then should look for categories and subcategories and build connection within categories and between categories. This will provide information relevant to the topic and help to clarify the research question. To conclude my presentation today, I would like to highlight that qualitative approach is important in health science research because it may provide detailed picture and a deep understanding about a particular health issue, why people perform particular health behavior and their feelings about these behaviors. It also can create openness because of its flexibility. It can encourage people to expand on their responses so that it can open up new topic areas that are not initially considered and increase opportunity to develop new ideas and theory that can be relevant for health practitioners. However, because fewer people are generally studied in qualitative research, it's not possible for us to generalize results to that of the population. And this is also not the purpose of the qualitative research, as qualitative research aims to gain in-depth understanding about the topic of interest. Lastly, the research questions will determine which approach is suitable to address the research questions. That's the end of my presentation today. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you for your very interesting presentation, Dr. Dini. After the first speakers, it's very clear to remind us about qualitative research. And let's move on to the second speakers. The second speakers will explain about how to doing the research using a mixed methods. Without further ado, Professor Ward, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what time it is in Indonesia, so either Selamat siang, maybe afternoon, but welcome. So I'm Paul. I'm Professor of Public Health at Flinders University in Australia. I was one of the supervisors of Dini's, the previous speaker, Dini's PhD that she did at Flinders University. And in Dini's PhD, she utilized qualitative research, but she also utilized some quantitative research. She did a cross-sectional survey, and then she did some interviews. And the idea of using different kinds of methods in research seems to be popular. There seems to be this idea that using both qualitative research to understand why something happens and quantitative research to be able to either quantify it or understand what it is that happened is popular. I guess this presentation is taking that a little bit deeper to really understand what these things called mixed methods are and the extent to which they are possible. In quite a lot of the literature, methodological literature on research, mixed methods have been called the third methodological movement. So from the scientific revolution 150, 200 years ago, quantitative research, the scientific method, so proposing some hypotheses, going out there and testing those hypotheses statistically, was the first methodological movement. Then probably 1950s, 1960s, there was an additional kind of research, qualitative research, which was seen as a second methodological movement, which was questioning whether we can count everything, whether we can measure everything statistically. And then along came qualitative research, and Dini's just done a great job of explaining qualitative research. Then more recently, the idea of mixed method research came along as the third methodological movement. Now, I'm questioning, I guess, whether or not, or the extent to which that is possible, the extent to which that is useful, and if we can do it, how do we do it? I do lots of quantitative research. I do all sorts of randomized control trials. I do also lots of qualitative research, all sorts of methods. And I do some research which tries to utilize the benefits of both. But in the literature what you will see, at least in the English speaking literature, what you will see is this idea that mixed method research are a thing, are easy. And I guess what I'm asking you to do is just be a little bit more critical about what you read. So how do I move this thing forward? I'm not entirely sure how I move this one for, here we go. So the kind of things I think I'd like to cover in however long we need this session to go for is firstly, just some clarification of terms. What is it that we're mixing? What are these things that we're talking about that we're mixing? Then to go into why would we want to? What's the purpose? What is the benefit of mixing both qualitative and quantitative research together within the same study? And then how might we do that? I'm going to use a case study of a piece of research I did quite some years ago to kind of look at the extent to which that's realistic. So in the title, I said, is it just cookbook research? And what I mean by that is it just a recipe? Like if you've got a recipe for gado-gado, and in the recipe, it says you need some peanuts and you need some eggs and you need some lettuce and you need some things like that. Is it as simple as that? Is it as simple as we simply just need to follow a recipe to mix methods? So I'm gonna use cooking as an analogy. So is it? That's not gado-gado. I couldn't really get a decent photo of gado-gado. However, imagine that is gado-gado. So are we simply mixing things together, like some interviews and some focus groups and a cross-sectional survey and a randomized control trial? Are we simply mixing them together? But the output isn't much different from the input. So in that context, the cheese still looks the same, the olives still look the same, the lettuce still looks the same. So are we just getting out the findings from our interviews separately and analysing them separately to the findings from our cross-sectional survey, which we analyse separately? If that's the case, then we're not really mixing them. We're just doing different methods, and we just acknowledge that. So if you keep the cooking analogy, and imagine that's gado-gado, keep the cooking analogy in your minds as we go through the presentation and try to think through, if you're mixing different methods, are the data that come out of your methods when you present your results and you write your publications or you do your PhD thesis or whatever it is, whatever research you're doing, does it still look the same as it would have done if you'd have done that study on its own? Or has the mixing of methods done something different? So if the mixing of methods does something new, there's a new output. So I couldn't think of an analogy in Indonesian cooking. So this is kind of anglicized European cooking. So imagine that you've got these variety of ingredients. So there's some sugar, there's some cocoa powder, some chocolate, some eggs, and some oats. So in the original, in the previous example, it was, you add those together, you get a salad. In this example, if we're really mixing, what we might get is a cake. So the original ingredients, so their methods and forms of data are in that cake. You can tell that they're in the cake. However, it looks different, it tastes different, it's got a different feel to it. So when if you're planning on doing mixed method research, the output, the outcome, the report, the kinds of analysis needs to be synthesized. And by synthesized, that means, as in a chemical reaction. when you add 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen together in controlled experiment, you get water. So the inputs and the output are 2 different things. They go together, but it looks different, it tastes different, it smells different. So use that in your thinking when you're thinking about, are you really doing mixed method research, or are you just creating a salad? So when I'm talking about this, and I want to clarify some terms, when we speak of mixed methods or mixing methods, that's what we talk about, the method. And in Dini's presentation, she talked about a paradigm, or what I would call an epistemology, but a paradigm. She talked about methodologies when she talked about phenomenology or grounded theory or all those things, and then method. So that they're kind of different levels of thinking. When we're talking about mixed methods, we're simply talking about that, the methods. So, I use kind of, again, cooking analogy. Add 1 randomized control trial, wait for 18 months, sprinkle with some interviews. So it just feels like it's a recipe approach. What this does, if you think about Dini's presentation, and we have in qualitative research, we have what Dini called an interpretivist paradigm, which is around interpreting the world from the perspective of the people we're talking with. Within that paradigm, you may have a phenomenological methodology. Within that, you may have some focus, some method, which might be focus groups or observation or interviews. Similarly, in a quantitative set of methods, the quantitative method might be part of an experiment, which is the methodology, which might be part of a paradigm that, like Dini talked about, which might be positivism, which is viewing that there is a single truth, and we just need not lots of numbers to tell us the truth. So when we're mixing methods, we're mixing methodologies. And when we're mixing methodologies, we're mixing paradigms. So you can't, if you're mixing a method, you're also mixing the methodology, you're also mixing the paradigm. So I think even though Dini's been through this, it's just useful just to do a little bit of a recap, a summary of that, to make this really clear. So when Dini talked about paradigm, so my training, even though I'm professor of public health, my training is I'm a sociologist. So I have a full training through many years of sociological training, and that's what most of my research is. And so I use some different words to Dini, but it makes no difference. When Dini talked paradigm, I think epistemology. And the whole purpose of this, and it'll become clear why it's important when you do actual research. The whole purpose of this is that as researchers, we have questions around what is an acceptable or a valid form of knowledge for the research that we want to do. So we might be interested in social distancing and COVID-19. And lots of countries, including in Indonesia, So you might be doing a piece of research on social distancing and COVID-19. And in Indonesia, I've got a number of colleagues and students still in all sorts of places of Indonesia. And there are all sorts of issues around how do we social distance? Why do we social distance? Is it possible? So you might be interested in that. And you might set up a piece of research. And that piece of research might be, you might want to understand why certain groups find it easier to social distance or certain groups find it more difficult to social distance. So the kind of knowledge that you want in terms of that particular piece of research is a knowledge which is trying to understand difference. So you're trying to understand why one group does certain things and why another group doesn't do certain things. In doing that, you're making an assumption that there isn't a single truth. You're making an assumption that there's not just one reason why people do or don't. You're saying culturally or socially, different groups do different things for different reasons. So what you're saying about knowledge is that knowledge is what I would term as a sociologist, socially constructed. What that means to non-sociologists is that different groups think different things for different reasons, but you're not trying to collapse those into a single category like quantitative research would do. You're trying to open up the different possibilities. And you're saying knowledge is socially constructed. Knowledge is different depending on which groups you sit in, or sometimes depending on the individual humans. Now, the purpose, and if you were wanting to understand from a quantitative perspective social distancing, then you would need to be able to measure something. So a priori, so beforehand, you need to have some kind of measure of social distancing. You'd have to have some kind of ideas as to why you think social distancing might be different, and you might send out a cross-sectional survey to a population and give them some options as to why they don't social distance. That's not trying to understand, that's trying to measure. But both of those forms of knowledge, whether it's a knowledge that's a single truth, a singular form of knowledge, or whether that's a belief that knowledge is contingent and different by different groups, that drives your decision on method. So what the form of knowledge, the epistemology or paradigm that assumes that there are different forms of knowledge, is around trying to understand from the perspective of the people. Therefore, it's interpretivist in using Dinny's language. And then it might be some interviews or some focus groups. But because you're doing interviews or focus groups, your assumption is that there are different kinds of knowledge out there, and I want to understand them. Similarly, if you're going out there to do a cross-sectional survey of reasons for not social distancing during COVID-19, that's a quantitative method, which assumes there's a singular truth. So if you're mixing methods, a qualitative and a quantitative, you're also mixing this idea, this difference between, well, one of these is based on there being multiple truths. One of them is being based on there's only one truth. So I'm mixing this idea of epistemology or paradigm. So this kind of came about, this whole idea came about, or at least in the kind of anglicized Western form of research, around about the time of French Revolution, Austrian Revolution, a couple of 100 years ago, and people questioning, why do we do the things that we do? So, you know, when someone comes to see a doctor, many, hundreds of years ago, there was the idea that if someone came to see a doctor with a potential illness, with a set of symptoms, the doctor may well cut them, just simply cut them, allow blood out, and the idea was that the body would get rid of whatever bad was in the body, and somehow they would get better. There was no scientific basis for that. It was just that's what they did. So in the French and Austrian Cultural Revolution, there was the idea of we need a scientific rationality for why we do what we do. So they developed the scientific method. They developed this idea of positivism, which is around being objective, having a generalized, kind of being able to generalize from your findings and coming up with a central law or a central truth, a singular truth. So the scientific method was born. And then much later down the track, much later in history, there was a lot of questions really from the Chicago School of Sociology, but a lot of questions around, can we measure everything? Is there a singular truth for everything? So then it was a lot of kind of social scientists thinking about things like love, hate, grief, trust, risk, lots of kind of social processes, which became the question of, does grief mean the same to everyone? Does illness experience mean the same to everyone? Does love mean the same to everyone? You know, I've got 4 children, and my love for my children is different to my love for my partner, or my love for my brother, or my love for my friends. Different forms of love, and different people think about love in very different ways. So this idea of interpretivism came along, which was, can we measure everything? Is there a singular truth? Is there a singular law? And can we actually measure everything? Or is there a form of knowledge which is about understanding difference, understanding the different ways in which different people or different groups think about a particular issue? And then this led, and if you think about Dinny's presentation, this led to different kinds of research. So I'm just taking you through a little bit of the history, because it becomes important when you question whether the extent to which you can mix things. So positivism then is around explaining something, which is why we need statistical generalizability. And interpretivism is around understanding something from the perspectives of the people themselves. So if this is our logic, that we have a technique, which is part of a method, which is part of a methodology, which is part of an epistemology, or in Dinny's language, a paradigm, we might see that, you know, an interview or a semi-structured interview that we want to do is a technique. And that's technique as part of the method of the interview. The method of interview is part of a qualitative methodology, an approach to research, which is part of an interpretivist epistemology. So when we're mixing an interview and a randomized control trial, we're mixing an interview. When we're doing, like, I'm doing a couple of randomized control trials at the moment, or researchers working with me are, and we're doing randomized control trials, but we're also doing lots of semi-structured interviews with lots of the participants to understand what it's like in the trial. What we're doing is we're mixing an interview with an experiment. And you think, okay, yeah, we can do that. If you move further up the line, we're mixing a qualitative approach with a quantitative approach. So a qualitative approach, which is around trying to develop theory, and a quantitative approach, which is around trying to test theory. So straight away you start to say, oh, can we mix those? If we go further up the graph, then we're mixing interpretivism, which is around, there are multiple truths out there, and our job is to try to understand from the perspective of participants, their views around the world, and the multiple truths around love or hate or grief or whatever it is we're interested in, versus positivism, which is around trying to, which has an assumption that there's a singular truth. So this particular slide's really important when you're thinking about mixed methods, because when we're mixing methods, we're mixing methodologies, but we're also mixing epistemologies, and that's where the question becomes, can we do this? So I think it's important to say, well, you know, what are the elements of qualitative and quantitative research before we can mix them? Dinny's done a really good job of explaining qualitative research and what are the benefits of qualitative research and what are the limitations of qualitative research. I think it's important to also look at quantitative research. And when you think of quantitative research and the scientific method, here we are. We have a theory. From theory, and the whole point is to test theory. So we develop some hypotheses and a research design. We then go and gather data. We then have enough data to make some statistical inferences. We then use inferential statistics to generalize to a population, and then we refine our theory. That's the traditional quantitative research design based on the scientific method. There are some criticisms of that, because you could say, well, why can't we just do that for everything? Well, One criticism of that is that the researcher sets the research question. It's the researcher's job to set that question, rather than the questions happening directly from the real world, which is what qualitative research does well. The research design often used in quantitative research, there are often problems around sampling because we need to have a representative generalizable sample. There are often biases in that sample. And because we only have a small sample, but we're trying to make reference to the large population, they often suffer from what's called ecological validity. And when we're trying to make some statistical inference, they tend to be, a word used in English is nomothetic, which means we're interested in averages, so the mean or the median. We're interested in regression to the mean. So we're interested in a single number, the average number of cigarettes smoked by young people. We're interested in averages in statistical research. We're not interested in looking at uniqueness or difference. Yes, we'll have a standard deviation, but we're less interested in the outliers in this kind of research, and we're more interested in the mean or the median. As opposed to qualitative research, where we're interested in the outsiders as well. We're interested in understanding difference. In quantitative research, we're not interested in difference, we're interested in the mean or the averages. So I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but there are a whole lot of kind of issues with quantitative research, which then mean that researchers will often look at additional kinds of research to try and plug the gaps in some of the difficulties around quantitative research, which is why lots of researchers think, because there are some difficulties around ecological validity in experiments, or because there are some differences around researchers coming up with the questions as opposed to members of the public coming up with the questions or participants coming up with the questions. Because of all that, often researchers then say, good, I'll do some qualitative research alongside my quantitative research, and then the problems of the quantitative research are dealt with by the qualitative research, but also the subjectivity and small sample sizes in my qualitative research are dealt with because I've got lots of numbers in my quantitative. So it seems like they're dealing with the problems of each other, and that's great. Makes total sense. And this is a slide which kind of picks up on some of that. So which of the bits of quantitative research get dealt with by the benefits of qualitative and vice versa. I'll move past that. So because there are problems with quantitative research, but because there are also problems with qualitative research or limitations with both, then it becomes okay, so we don't want to only use quantitative because we know there are some issues with just doing that. But we might not only want to do qualitative research because we know there are some limitations with qualitative research too. So then it becomes so what is the potential for mixing research methods? Keeping in mind there's an epistemological, a kind of philosophical problem potentially, but you have to keep that in mind that there's a philosophical problem. So we have different approaches to that. So a purist a purist approach would be this: given that when you mix methods, you're also mixing methodologies and you're mixing epistemologies, then a purist, a very traditional purist researcher would say, well, therefore, we can't mix methods. We're applying different methods. This is the salad, this is the gado-gado. So we are simply applying different methods, but the data that comes out of them are just the same. The qualitative study that we did remains a qualitative study. And the quantitative study we did remains a quantitative study, but they're not really mixed. They're just separate. That's a purist approach. I'm not saying I advocate that, but there is a literature around this which would say you can't do it. You're doing different studies with different aims and different objectives, and you write about them differently, you analyze them differently. And they may say, yeah, you can do a study with qualitative methods in it and quantitative methods in it, but you're not really mixing them. It's not creating a cake. It's just keeping as gado. So they may use terms like a pluralistic approach, so an approach using multiple approaches, but it's not really mixing. There's then what might be called a pragmatic approach, so a kind of a realist approach. And I guess I sit myself in here, in that I recognize the epistemological problems, the philosophical problems of mixing epistemologies. However, I still see the value, in using different methods in the same study. And I'm going to go through a kind of set of processes that people talk about in terms of how this might work. And they're about integration, how we integrate different methods, or the sequencing of different methods, how you might do one and then another in a sequence. Around the use of a term called triangulation, where you might use different methods to shed different kinds of light on the same research question, and then how we might be able to combine and transform data. And I'll go through each of those in step. But this has to be seen that you have to, in doing this, you have to kind of put the epistemological, the philosophical problem, you have to kind of put that to one side when we're doing these. In the kind of integration of qualitative and quantitative methods, there's a book by Miles and Huberman quite a long time ago that outlined 4 kind of research designs around how to integrate qualitative and quantitative methods. And they talk about these 4, and I'm going to go into each of these: a continuous collection of both types of data over time, continuous qualitative research over time with some waves of quantitative, qualitative study followed by quantitative, followed by qualitative, or the other way around. So first one, a continuous collection of both kind of data, like a cohort study. So in a cohort study, you may get a bunch of people at the beginning of a study, and you are tracking them through time over the next 6 months or 12 months or 20 years. And you're collecting all sorts of quantitative data on them, but you may also be collecting all sorts of qualitative data from them. So you can see how those kind of go side by side a long time. They're less, you don't see those very often because they're very, very expensive studies to run, but it is a research design. You don't really see it very often. This kind of approach is more, you see this more often, whereby you might have a qualitative study running for a period of time, whereby you're doing an observational study in a community, I don't know, in a Puskesmas or in a, I don't know, but a longer term continuous field study. And then at different points in time, over time, you might be collecting quantitative data. So quantitative data in wave 1 and wave 2, wave 3, it may be, that wave may refer to COVID-19. It may be at different points in the COVID-19 epidemic, you collect quantitative data at different time points, but throughout that, you may be collecting observational qualitative data throughout that. This one is much more, is seen a lot more, this kind of research design, whereby you may have an initial qualitative study to explore a particular issue. You may use those data from your initial qualitative study in order to develop a quantitative questionnaire, a quantitative measure, which you then apply to a population. You may then do your statistical analysis, and then you think, I don't really know how to interpret these data. You know, I've got my statistical analysis, but I want some meaning from them. So you then may go and do an additional qualitative study at the end to take the quantitative findings to a population and say, can you help us to explain these? What do these mean? How do you interpret what these mean? So that's a very well-used research design, mixed method research design. And similarly, there may be the opposite, whereby there's a predefined, validated questionnaire survey. So you might put that out there into the population. On the basis of that survey, you may then do a qualitative study to try to make sense of, so how might we make sense of that? How might we interpret those data? You might use that in order to develop what you think is an appropriate intervention. So use a qualitative study on the basis of your survey to develop an intervention, and then do a quantitative randomized control trial. So I worked with a PhD student a couple of years ago who did this. Well, she actually had a qualitative before the first qualitative, but she was interested in violence and depression in young men in Thailand. So she did a quantitative survey to understand the prevalence of both depression and aggression in young men in Thailand. So a big national quantitative survey. So she got all the data back from that. We did the statistical analysis. She then wanted to say, so now I know which groups have the highest levels of depression and aggression. What do I do about it? Why have they got the aggression? What is the link between aggression and depression? What might we be able to do? How might we be able to work with these young men in order to try to reduce their aggression and hopefully their depression? So she then did a qualitative study with a selection of young men in Bangkok. And then from that, she developed an intervention, which was a mindfulness meditation intervention, that she then implemented a randomized control trial in Bangkok to look at what is the effectiveness of this particular intervention. So she followed that particular quantitative, qualitative, quantitative research design. So all of these are possible. In a study I did a few years ago when I was still working in the UK, we had a big study of nurse and pharmacist prescribing. So in the UK, the role of prescribing was that of a doctor, a medical doctor. So someone would go in with some symptoms, the doctor would diagnose and prescribe some particular therapy. At the time, the UK government was interested in, can this role be performed by nurses and pharmacists in addition to doctors? So I got the contract to look at the effectiveness of nurse and pharmacist prescribing in the UK and the problems with it, and what problems were there, and the barriers, the safety of it, the cost effectiveness of it, a whole lot. So there was a whole lot of quantitative data collection we did. So we did questionnaire surveys with pharmacists and nurse prescribers and patients. We analysed the actual prescribing data. So what was prescribed, to whom, and how safe was it? And we did an ethnography, and we analysed some quantitative data from the ethnography as well. So a whole lot of different kinds of quantitative data we did. There was a whole range of qualitative data. So we interviewed lots of policymakers in Department of Health. We interviewed lots of nurses and pharmacists and patients that we got them from the survey, and then interviewed lots of those around their experiences of being prescribed by nurses and pharmacists as opposed to GPs. We interviewed lots of GPs and hospital doctors around their perspectives on how nurse and pharmacist prescribing was working. And we also did an ethnography. So we had researchers who were watching, observing actual clinical interactions where nurses and pharmacists were prescribing, and we had an ethnography, an observation. So we had all sorts of quantitative and qualitative data in all sorts of ways, and some of it was independent, some of it was sequenced, some of it was integrated. I guess that the issue, when I look back at that study, and it could be seen as a mixed methods study. When I look back at that study, I see all of our publications that we wrote from that study based on singular methods. I didn't see that we actually integrated, really. So when I look back at at that particular study, I look back at that and I'm not convinced of the mixing of that. I think that we did lots of individual methods, and some of them led on to others, some of them impacted others, but it felt like more of a salad than a cake. It felt like more of a kind of gado-gado, whereby the individual data at the end were from individual methods as opposed to some kind of synthesis happening. And it kind of looked a little bit like this. So at the bottom, the green arrow is time. So that's how it worked over time. So at the beginning of the study, we did some stakeholder interviews, which are qualitative, and we used some prescribing data, which are quantitative. So we used that in order to develop some questionnaires. So you could see that that's a form of integration. We integrated qualitative and quantitative data to develop some questionnaires. We then applied the questionnaires and got some data. From the people who did the questionnaires, the people who filled the questionnaires out, we then interviewed a sample of those. So in the interviews, you can see how we integrated the questionnaire data into the interviews, because we sampled some of them. So we used that method to find the interviewees. We also used some of the data from the questionnaires to decide where we were going to do the ethnographies, so which clinics we would do the observations, and also some of the data from the interviews was used into the ethnographies. So there's some integration happening, some sequencing happening. So depending on your perspective, you could see that that's a very good mixed method study, or you could see that it has its own limitations. So that was integration. So in terms of sequencing, the sequencing is when I talked before around, we look at the strengths and the limitations of particular methods. The sequencing is around playing to the strengths of qualitative research and quantitative research. So it's not degrading qualitative research to an inferior function. It's not saying, oh, the quantitative research is by far the most important and the qualitative is slightly useful, but not very. It's not doing that at all. It's saying both of these have equal validity and they both inform one another. That's also a little bit similar to the idea of triangulation, whereby the weak spots of each method are compensated by including additional methods. Quantitative research isn't very good at in-depth understanding of a phenomena. So we complement the quantitative research with qualitative research, which is good at understanding the in-depth, an in-depth understanding of a phenomena. There's a whole range of literature which contests the idea of triangulation, and really, is it useful? Nevertheless, in the literature at least, there's the idea that triangulation is one method of mixed methods research. And then finally, this idea of combining or transforming data, I find this the least useful. I've put a slide on it here. I don't really believe that it's particularly useful. Transforming, because it's about transforming qualitative into quantitative data. So, in your interviews, you somehow then transform something that people say and give a number to it. So you know, I don't know, your strength of opinion on from a 1 to 5 or something. It misses the point. My personal belief is it misses the point. If you're going to be trying to quantify something that's based on an epistemology of positivism, which is testing theory, generalizability, quantification, objectivity. So to me, it's missing the point, but nevertheless, it's mentioned in the literature. I just don't really believe it. And also transforming qualitative into quantitative. So this is often when people do cross-sectional surveys with, I don't know, 2,000 people, and they put some open text questions in and regard that as qualitative. Again, it's missing the point that the cross-sectional survey is there to look at a cross-section of the population that is generalizable and you can infer to the population. If you somehow try and take words from that and create meaning, it misses the whole point of both the epistemology and the methodology. So I guess when you're thinking about doing some research, you might be doing a Master of Public Health, you might be thinking of doing a PhD, you might be an academic, and you're thinking about a piece of research that you want to do, and you're thinking about the possibilities for mixed methods research. So when you're thinking about it and how to assess mixed methods research, think about these. Are both approaches given equal weight? You know, in your research, in your plan, in the relevance of the results, in the way that you describe and analyze them? Or are you kind of giving more credibility to one than the other? Because if so, you're not really mixing. So in mixing, you need to be giving the different approaches equal weight, equal kind of validity. Are both approaches just applied separately? So are you doing your randomized control trial and your interviews, are you just applying them separately? If so, are you really mixing them? Or are they really related to one another? Are they really mixed? What's the logical relation between them? Are they sequenced? Are they integrated? You know, are they really related to one another, or do they just kind of inform each other? And then how would you evaluate the mixed methods approach? You know, are you using some kind of Cochrane collaboration criteria for randomized control trials to evaluate the quality of that research? So just in summary, and then I'm guessing we're throwing it open to questions. I guess that the take-home messages, I assume, I think, are, so when we're talking about mixing methods, a randomized control trial and an interview, what we're talking about is mixing methodologies, qualitative and quantitative methodologies, or inductive and deductive research. And we're talking about mixing epistemologies, or as Dinny said, paradigms. So we're not just mixing method, we're mixing paradigms. And the question then becomes, can we really mix paradigms, or is it just a gado salad, or is it really a cake? So camps have been created in the literature. Camps, so groups of people who are very pro mixed methods. So the pragmatists who are saying, yeah, all right, we know we can't mix epistemologies, but we're going to get on with this anyway. And the kind of anti groups who say, you just can't do it. You can't do it because you can't mix epistemologies. So you've got these kind of pro and antis, and you need to be aware of that when you're reading the literature. Be aware of that. But for you, I guess it's kind of the fitness for purpose. So when, as Dinny said, you know, when you're thinking about what are the appropriate methods in a piece of research, you go back to, what's my research question? So do I have a research question which requires different kinds of evidence, different kinds of data, different kinds of epistemologies? Is that my research question? If my research question requires a what and a why, then yeah, of course. But let your research question decide your methodological choices, as opposed to what I see happen too often is people feel that they ought to do a mixed method study, but the research questions don't actually require a mixed method study. So follow Dini's example of have your research question and then let the methodological choices flow directly from your research question, not the other way around. And that's the end of my presentation by the looks of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Ward. What an excellent presentation, Professor. Thank you for make analogy. The mixing methods looks like cooking methods. In Indonesian salad, you call it a gado-gado. Yes, this is my favorite food from Indonesia. Okay, for the next session.
You know what my favorite food is? My favorite food's babi guling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, don't know why, just is.
Okay, thank you. Let's try to another food, Indonesian food, Professor. Okay, the next session is Q&A sessions. Today, we have almost 250 registered participants who have joined in Zoom meeting and also in YouTube Live. And I would like to say hello to the participant who joined in YouTube Live. And then I hope after this webinar, we would have 250 research projects using a qualitative methods and mixed methods. Okay, and I would like to share the question from the participants. Wait a minute. Okay, this is the first questions is pointed to Dr. Dini Setiawati. This question is from Dwi Novrianda from Universitas Andalas. This is the question. May you respond, please, Dr. Dini?
Yes. Yes. Can you more explain about tone and inflection and give the example? Okay, so tone and inflection is related to the participant's voice, about the pitch, about the strength, about the quality of the voice of the participants. So if we interview the participant, or just simply if we talk with our friends or our family, sometimes they give a high voice or intonation or different intonation. It depends on the context when we talk about. When the intonation, the pitch, the strength of the voice, it can mean something in the qualitative research. For example, the tone and the inflection we will notice that whether participants is certain or not certain with the answer, or whether they have a positive or negative feelings about a particular issue, or whether they have reluctance or enthusiastic with something with something that we discussed. And for example, when I interview the smokers, it just my recent project is smoker. So I would like to know whether the smokers their perception about the impact of smoking in oral health. So because most of smokers only say about the impact on the cardiovascular disease in their lung and so on, but never, I rarely hear that they tell me about the impact of smoking in oral health, about oral cancer and stuff. And then I asked my participants, my informants, I asked them, and they, this participant, only one, just one participant, I talk about one participant. These participants is likely have a good knowledge about the impact of smoking, not only in general health, but also in oral health, because he can say about the impact of smoking in oral cancer, because when he smokes using his mouth, so the first location that is exposed with the smoke is in oral environment. So he believes that smoking will have an adverse impact on oral health. He tells a lot of information and that showing that he has good knowledge about the effect of smoking on general health and oral health. But then when I asked him whether he has a plan to stop smoking or quit smoking, he said no.
Okay.
He first just smiling and laughing and say no, but it's the intonation is so low. It means that yeah, he's not certain with the answer. He is not certain to with although he know about the impact of the adverse effect of smoking in general and oral health, but he's still not sure if he will be able to stop smoking. He explained why he's still not sure to stop smoking, like because their social environment, most of his friends are smokers, and then he haven't got another strategy to cope or deal with his stress and so on. When he has anything to do, he used to smoke. So there are a lot of barriers that prevent someone to stop smoking, and we can assess whether he's certain or not, whether he have positive or negative feeling towards quit smoking from their voice, for their intonation, for their pitch of the voice, for their strength of the voice that they say.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Dr. Dini. And the next question, we have a question for it also for Dr. Dini Setiawati. This is from Muriantinah Mulyo Handayani from Psychology Faculty. This is the question. Please your response, Dr. Dini.
Okay. So your participants will be autistic adult, but the participant may be uncomfortable with face-to-face interview. So you plan to interview using written form rather than face-to-face interview. Maybe I have to highlight here. In qualitative research, we have to make a good relationship first with the participants. We have to get their trust first before we interview participants. For this case, when your participants is autistic adult that may be not uncomfortable with the face-to-face interview, you may approach their family first, or maybe they have like a teacher or something like that, or a therapist for the autistic syndrome, or yeah, other people that relate to him or her, and you can talk about how the best strategy to approach or to ask questions to the participants, the informants. Because if you use a written interview in written form to ask questions to the participant, you may miss a lot of opportunity to probe or to explore in more detail regarding the participants' answer. We can only if we conduct face-to-face interview, we can give a follow-up questions based on the participants' response or answer. So we can explore, we can probe in more detail from the participants' response. But if you use a written form to ask the question, you may miss this opportunity to explore, to get a deep understanding about the topic of your interest. That's my question. That's my answer. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dini. And the third question is for Professor Ward. This is the same second question from Muriatinah Mulyo Handayani. This is the question, Professor. May you respond, please?
Not. I mean, the question is, should participants in qualitative and quantitative data collection be the same? Not necessarily. No. It very much depends on the particular study that you're doing. So it may be that you are undertaking a quantitative cross-sectional survey, a quantitative study. And then from that, it may be that you're selecting particular participants to be interviewed. So in that context, the participants in your qualitative study are drawn from the sample of your quantitative study. And that's okay. It may be that you've got a broader study on, I'm going to stick with COVID-19 because it's the most contemporary research area. So it may be that you've got a quantitative study trying to understand how different groups respond to social distancing around COVID-19. And it may be that you do, I don't know, a quantitative analysis of Google travel data, which is being used at the moment in Australia to in Google and Ask Siri and Apple data and all sorts of kind of quantitative data. You can see when people are traveling because it tracks their GPS data and you can see where people are moving. And in Melbourne, where they're getting a spike of COVID-19 cases at the moment, when they're imposing lockdowns, then they can track how many people are still moving around Melbourne, how many people are still moving around Victoria. So you could use that as your quantitative data, but your qualitative data may be with particular group. The quantitative data may identify, I don't know, 15 to 29-year-old men are still driving around a lot, even though they're meant to be, in lockdown. Your qualitative data may be a specific sample of 15 to 29-year-old men in Melbourne to try and understand what's going on for them that means that they're not taking the lockdown as seriously as other people. So, in some research studies, yes, they can be the same. In other research studies, they don't have to be. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And the fourth question, it is pointed to Dr. Dini Setiawati from Anissa Nurahmawati from Mula Warman University. May you respond, please?
Yes, about qualitative data analysis and give some example from your research. Okay. For analyzing qualitative data is really about experience. The more often you try to learn to analyze qualitative data, the more easier for you to analyze the qualitative data. So if you want me to give the example, I would like to just get one example from my PhD research, where Professor Paul Watt is one of my supervisor. One of the topic that is in my qualitative research project in my PhD research is about sugar snaking in preschool children. So I already interviewed with 31 participants, parents of children under 5 years old, and 15 of them have children with dental caries, and 16 of them have children with caries free. And then I interview both groups, and I audio recorded my interview, and then I transcribe the audio data. I transcribe, and then after I have all transcription, and I read and reread, I don't know how many times I keep reading my transcript and listen to the audio recording as well, and I get familiar with the data, with my data. I even know after this participant will say what. I notice, and I'm aware of that. And then after that, I get a marker, highlighter. I just give a highlight for the words that have idea or relate to my research questions about factor influencing supersnacking. I give a highlight in my transcript, and I give a code or label in the next sentence or word that I highlight. I give code, I give label, just short word or short sentence to give label or code for what I have highlighted. After I got all the translation I have coded, I compare from one code and another code, and then I identify whether there is a similarity of differences, and then I start to classify. I look for category and subcategory. So the codes that have a similar meaning or similar term, I will put in one group and so on. And then after I have a category and subcategory, for example, in here, in my result for factors influencing sugar snaking in preschool children, I have a category or terms. There are three categories. It's about parenting practice, it's about family influence, and social culture. And for subcategories, so I have to like break down subcategory for parenting practice. Here I have role modeling from the parents, role modeling from the siblings, or also the rules for sugar snaking, like if there are any limitation or any restriction for sugar snaking, what's the rule that the parents apply for the children for sugar snaking. And for the second category for family influence, it's related to the power of the grandparents. You know, like in Indonesia, we often feel like reluctant, or we are afraid to say no to our parents, right? Mm-hmm. So when the parents want to restrict sugar snacking for their children, but the grandparents keep giving sugar snacking, the parents can say no. They just feel afraid or feel hesitate to just say, don't give my children sugar snacking and stuff. And for the third category is about social cultural influence. It's related to the presence of food stall. We call warung in Indonesia. Food stalls, and then the social environments of the children, like many children in their social environment also have sugar snacking habits, and also there's a culture of sugar snacking in their social environment as subcategory. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dini. The next question is not pointed to Dr. Dini or to Professor Paul Ward. Maybe both of you can respond these questions. This question is from Willy Sandika from Faculty of Medicine Universitas Airlangga. She said that please give me an article in journal which use qualitative research in medical sciences. Thank you. Maybe first, Professor Ward, maybe for your response, please.
I'm not quite sure what when you say please give me an article, I'm not sure what that means. I mean, I'm editor of BMC Public Health and Frontiers in Public Health and International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. So all, medical science journals, all of which publish lots of qualitative studies. I personally publish lots and lots of qualitative studies in medical science journals. So I'm not sure if you're asking for us to send you some or just to say that it's a possibility. I'm not quite sure. What do you think, Dinny?
Maybe he means that he never or rarely read or see a journal article in medical science with qualitative approach, maybe. But when I tried to search in internet, I found like perception and behavior of patients toward diabetes management. It's one of the example of qualitative research in medical sciences. And also, there's a qualitative study of patient attitude toward HIV testing.
Yeah.
And also a life experience of women living with HIV/AIDS. It's also qualitative research. It's all the three examples that I give to you. The title is qualitative research in medical science. So you can't just search in the internet or search engine typing medical science research, medical science qualitative research. You will have no results. But if you just make it specific, like maybe you are interested in diabetes management or HIV or cardiovascular disease, or yes, the specific topic, just type in search engine and qualitative research. At the end, you will get the result. And it's a lot of medical science with qualitative approach in international journal article. Yeah, but yes, in Indonesia, I think that I still rarely see or read journal article with qualitative approach from Indonesian author, but from international researchers, it's quite a lot.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this is the answer of this question. Professor Pawat, I do have a question for you. As your experience as an editor or as a reviewer, how to know that this article is use qualitative methods in the best way, maybe? But because I'm from Department of Oral Medicine, so I didn't have experience doing qualitative research. So I'm also a chief editor of our faculty journals. Sometimes I didn't know this is using qualitative methods in the best way or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so in a number of journals now, a little bit like when you do or when you try to publish a systematic review, journals will ask you to complete the PRISMA before reporting of systematic reviews and meta-analyses. They will ask you to complete those to show that you've gone through the appropriate steps in a systematic review. In qualitative research, a number of journals now are starting to use it. It's something called COREQ 32. So it's COREQ, and then the number 32.
Oh, okay.
And that's a set of criteria that have been developed. There's lots of criteria, but it's a relatively useful one. A set of criteria that I use to judge the quality of qualitative publications or qualitative reports or whatever people are writing. So there's 32 items in this set of criteria, and you can, as a journal editor or as a reviewer or as a supervisor of a qualitative study or as a student to assess the quality of your own research, you can use these criteria. So there's this, the COREQ 32, the Cochrane collaboration in their Cochrane handbook have a set of criteria for assessing the quality of qualitative research. The purpose of that one is that if you're doing a systematic review of qualitative research, you need to be able to assess the quality of the research to decide whether it's in your review or not. But as a journal editor, you can use the same criteria. So there's a whole range of different criteria out there that people use to assess whether or, well, to assess the quality of a particular publication, or in the context of a journal reviewer or a journal editor, the quality of something which is submitted, that you want to decide whether or not this is good quality qualitative research. So that, yeah, there's quite a lot of different sets of criteria out there that can be used.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion, Professor. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This question is pointed to Professor Ward. This question is from Hani Puspitasari from Pharmacy Faculty of Universitas Airlangga. And this is the question, Professor. May you respond, please?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Interesting, I'm assuming Pharmacy Unair is from Faculty of Pharmacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I mean, interestingly, my first research position 25 years ago. So my first research job as a researcher was in the School of Pharmacy at the University of Manchester, at the School of Pharmacy, and I was going into that School of Pharmacy as a qualitative sociology researcher. So the people within pharmacy who, you know, are trained in quantitative methodology, trained in the scientific paradigm, would always say to me, but all you do is, you know, you talk with a few people or you observe a few things. Like, that's, you know, in what way is that like proper scientific? So you know, I've had this argument thrown at me for 25 years. And I guess that the response to that is that that qualitative research isn't trying to prove anything. So it's still scientific, you know, it's based on social science methods, but it's not trying to prove anything with a generalizable population. It's trying to understand something in the level of depth that's required. And therefore, you don't need big numbers to understand something from the perspective of the participants that you've got. And the just a few people you interview or do focus groups or observe with whatever methods you're using until such time that nothing new is coming out. So you wouldn't just say, oh, I'm going to interview 10 people, and then when it gets to 10, I'm going to stop. You would say, I will interview enough people with diverse situations until I keep interviewing and interview more and interview more until such time that I'm still hearing the same stories. Nothing new is coming out. It's something called data saturation. So, you know, I guess a simple explanation to people who don't regard it as scientific is to say it has a very different purpose to quantitative research. And you know, you could say, so, you know, a study I did, well, that I did with a PhD student quite a few years ago around HIV transmission and condom use by female sex workers in Indonesia, was you know, the quantitative research around that simply told us that 50 to 60% of female sex workers don't use, have inconsistent condom use. And it told us a little bit about those female sex workers, but not much. It was descriptive. It told us what the prevalence of condom use was like with female sex workers and clients. The qualitative research that we did with the female sex workers, which we've published quite a few papers from, so, you know, qualitative research in HIV and female sex work in Indonesia, and we've published a few papers from that study. Now, the qualitative research really gave us an understanding that we never have got from the quantitative research. So we understood the migration of female sex workers from villages into larger population centres. We understood that these young women tended to be young women, had a felt need to try to look like they were successful to their families back in their villages. So they needed to earn more money, or to earn more money to send money back to the villages that they came from. That because they had a need to earn more money, when they were offered sex without a condom for more money, it became oh, should I, shouldn't I? Also, the movement of sex workers geographically often meant that there was a lack of trust between female sex workers. So the ones that we interviewed would say, well, I don't trust some of the other sex workers around here. I think that they may well accept sex without a condom. So firstly, I've got a need to look like I'm economically, financially doing well. I then move around a lot, so I don't really have very good social networks with other sex workers. So I don't necessarily trust them. So yes, I'm going to accept sex without a condom because I'm going to get more money. But there's all these other things that are going on that unless we'd done the qualitative research, the interviews with sex workers, we would have never have known that. So I know that that's not a simple explanation, but it's just that these two different kinds of research have two different purposes. And the surveys with sex workers told us some things that are useful, but they didn't tell us the why. And the interviews with sex workers didn't tell us the prevalence, but did tell us the why. So I hope that that's a useful way of trying to say, in pharmacy or wherever else you are, when you're getting people saying the qualitative research isn't scientific, hopefully that gives you a little bit of something to be able to say back to people.
Okay, thank you, Professor. And the next question is also for Professor Ward. This is from Dwi Novrianda from Andalas University. In the mixed methods experimental design, where I hold an interview, develop intervention, qualitative and quantitative. Okay, please your response, Professor.
I guess your question about how do you interpret the data, I guess the issue there is you've got a number of different stages or studies or whatever you want to call them. So I guess the question then is, are you wanting to interpret the data from your individual studies, which is what most people tend to do? Or are you trying to pull these data together to interpret them in a broader, so-called mixed methods way? So it goes back to what is it that you're trying to do? What are your research questions? And then are you just wanting to interpret the intervention data on its own? Are you wanting to then, where the intervention didn't work, using the qualitative data to help you to explain why the intervention didn't work or why it did work or why it worked better in different contexts? So it really depends on what it is that you're wanting to do with those studies as to how you then analyze the data.
Okay, wait a minute. I would like to collect the new question from the participants. Wait a minute. Okay. And we have three last questions. And this three last question is for Professor Ward. So this is the next question. Wait a minute, I would like to, okay. This is from Mara Ipa from LIPPJHKI. This is the question. Okay, Professor, please your response, please.
I guess tips on publishing qualitative articles. I guess the first tip, I suppose, is to look in the journals that you're interested in and to look at the structure of the qualitative articles that they already publish. So, I'll give you some examples. So, you're talking about in international journals. So, international medical journals still publish qualitative data, qualitative papers, but the structure of them is very different, primarily because of the word count. So if you're trying to publish a paper in Journal of American Medical Association or British Medical Journal, and it's based on a qualitative study, then you tend to get 2,500, 3,000 words maximum. So the extent to which you can really explain a qualitative study is difficult when you've got 2,500 to 3,000 words, versus something like Social Science and Medicine, which is one of the top kind of social science type journals in the world, where you've got up to about 8,000 words. So, choose the journals that you think are going to be the most appropriate for the study that you want to publish, the paper that you want to publish. Then look in those journals to look at what do the qualitative articles look like in this journal? How do they structure them? How much emphasis needs to go into theory? How much emphasis needs to go into analysis? Do they put their quotes in tables? Do they put their quotes into the text? Those kind of things. Have a look at that first, and then, and only then, can you think, right, so now I know how to structure the paper that I want to write for that particular journal. So I think often people will write the paper and then think, where does this paper go? My strategy for publishing is, once I know what story I want to tell with a particular paper, I then make a choice on the journal. And once I've made a choice on which journal I think is going to be the most appropriate, I then look at the structure for that journal, the expectations of similar papers that have been published in that journal, and then I'll structure the paper that I want to write.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So, based on your experience, what is the challenge to publish the qualitative method research, Professor? It's only to interpret the data, or have another challenge to publish?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any more challenges of publishing qualitative research or quantitative research. I think, it depends on the quality of the study that you've undertaken, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. I don't think there are any more challenges to publishing qualitative research. There are enough journals internationally that have become more willing to publish qualitative research now, that I don't think any more challenges exist. I think as long as it's a rigorous study that was undertaken, that it fulfills all the criteria that you would assume would be required of, in this context, a qualitative study. I don't see any. I think it used to be, maybe when I first started research 25 years ago, it was probably a little bit harder then to publish qualitative research, because there weren't as many journals that recognized it, that thought that it's anything more than journalism. And I think now we have more people like me who are on editorial boards of journals, who are recognizing the usefulness of good qualitative research, and more people, more universities teaching qualitative research, like this webinar, actually, talking about qualitative research. The first Indonesian student that I supervised, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, probably, he did he came to me. He's at Udayana University, and he came to me to do some research around HIV prevention in Indonesia, and he'd never heard of qualitative research. It wasn't taught at Udayana. He didn't know anything about it. I persuaded him that in addition to doing some quantitative research, he should do some qualitative research. He's now published lots of qualitative studies. He now teaches qualitative research at Udayana University, and the same with Dini, in terms of the more that we get things like this webinar, which I think is wonderful, the more that we get these things going, the more that we open people's eyes to the possibilities of qualitative research. Not that it's any better or any worse than quantitative research, just that some research questions require a qualitative approach. So the more that these things happen, the more that journals are more likely to open their eyes as well to qualitative research.
Okay, thank you for the response, Professor. The next question is from Dian Pratiwi from Faculty of Nursing Universitas Airlangga. This is the question. This question is not pointed only for Professor Ward, but also for Dr. Dini Setiawati. Maybe Dr. Dini Setiawati, your response first, please.
Okay, I think I already covered this topic in my presentation, how we can collect the data in this pandemic situation. So because we can't contact a person personally, we can have a face-to-face interview with a person. What I would like to suggest, and I have done this in my current research project, I will use video call. So we can use, like, we can approach a gatekeeper if it's required. For example, if we need a parents who has preschool children, so we can approach a school, and the school, one of the teacher will be a gatekeeper to connect us with the parents. Or maybe if we want to interview with elderly, we can contact community health service. They have cadre over there, and we can use health cadre as our gatekeeper to contact us with the elder people in the area of the health community center. And then after that, after we have approached the participants, I suggest to use a video call rather than just audio call or just a telephone interview, because if we use video call, we can still see how they will their expression when they answer our question, about their gesture, and also if we can observe the expression of the participants, and it will be useful for us when we analyze the data. We can give, like, the situation when they answer a particular question, whether they're certain or not, whether they are reluctant to answer or not, whether they have positive or negative feelings about a particular question. So I personally prefer to have a video call in this pandemic situation to the audio call. But if the participants refuse to have video call for interview, and maybe they only willing to be interviewed using audio call or telephone interview, so that's fine. At least we don't lose any opportunity to get people's or individuals' voice regarding the topic of our interest.
Okay, thank you. What about Professor Power? What do you think about this condition, Professor?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Dini. we're doing lots of studies at the moment on COVID-19, lots of qualitative studies. You know, the majority, because of social distancing, social isolation, the majority of those studies were using things like Zoom, like we're using now, because you've got the opportunity to record it. So you get the audio recording, but you also get the video recording. So, I mean, that's a really useful thing. Most people seem to have become very used to using Zoom. Lots of schools are using it if they're doing homeschooling. So, yeah, I think it probably, that seems to be, for us anyway, in lots of studies we're doing at the moment, that seems to be the technology of choice, I suppose. But it's interesting. We've got I got a PhD student here from Indonesia who's doing his research on pasung, the incapacitating people with a diagnosed mental illness in the community, and he can't get back to Indonesia to go and do actual data collection. So he's decided for this stage of his research, because he's stuck here in Adelaide and can't get back to do data collection, he's found some online already recorded interviews and videos from an organization called Free Pasung to do some secondary analysis of. So he's doing some qualitative analysis of existing interviews and videos whilst waiting for international borders and things to open up and to allow travel within Indonesia to do some data collection. So, you know, I think it's kind of thinking in innovative ways around other options. Sometimes even, you know, video calls are not possible for some populations. Say, for example, prison populations, you know, doing video calls wouldn't be possible. So then it's thinking about other ways in which you could still answer that research question, but using different or new methods.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I think the technology is help us a lot for the qualitative research too. And then the last questions is from Ira Nurmala from Faculty of Public Health. This question is pointed to Professor Ward. Please your response, Professor.
Yeah, so in terms of data saturation, there isn't a minimal number. It very much depends upon. So there's something called diverse case sampling, which means that you go in and you start doing some interviews around a particular topic, and then you start getting very similar stories given in the interviews. And then kind of theoretically you say, so, well, you know, who are the people who I think might have a different story to tell? Still around the same issue. So if you were looking at social distancing and COVID-19, and you start interviewing lots of 15 to 29-year-old people, and they start telling you things, and you start hearing the same story, you might say, right, I'm still interested in 15 to 29-year-old people. Who would I think might be different? So I might say, have I interviewed males and females? Yeah. Have I interviewed people with different cultural background for whom social social venues and social relations might be different. So would it be different if you are a Muslim people who are used to going to religious ceremonies with lots of people versus Anglo people who are quite happy to live on your own? Would it be different for people who have, I don't know, in sporting clubs? I'm just making this up. So once you start interviewing these kind of diverse groups of people, and then you start hearing the same stories, then you can say, I think with however many interviews I did, I think I've got to saturation, because I've tried to find difference. And even when I've looked for different kinds of people, I'm still getting the same stories that are coming out. So I think that I've saturated my data. In terms of focus group interviews and focus group discussion, it's the same thing. You know, Dinny talked about focus groups. Whether you call them discussions or interviews makes no difference. It's a group of people who you ask to discuss a particular issue. It's not 5 or 8 people answering to you as the researcher. You're trying to get those people, those 5 to 8 people, or however many you're in the group, it doesn't matter too much. You're trying to get them to discuss an issue. They're the experts. You want them to discuss and debate a particular thing, whatever it is that you're wanting them to discuss. And narrative studies, there are kind of rules about that, but a narrative study is, you know, narrative means story. You're trying to understand a particular story from those participants, and there are some methods of narrative analysis when you're looking for storylines, and you know who's the, as if you were, you know, as I said, I've got 4 kids and 4 children. My youngest is 10, and they, you know, in school they're taught about the narrative structure of, and you know, you're writing an assignment, you're writing an essay, you're writing a story. There's the narrative structure. You know, there's a beginning where you set the scene, and then you've got plots and things in them. Then a narrative-based study is the same. You're looking for the scene, the plots, the storyline. You're looking for all those things when you do that kind of qualitative study too. So there are kind of rules to that, but lots of literature on how to do narrative-based studies.
Okay, thank you, Professor. I think we have answered all of our questions today. Maybe for the last opportunity, would you mind to give us your closing remarks? Maybe the first, Dr. Dini, please, your closing remarks.
Okay. As far as I know, the qualitative approach is still not common in Indonesia, particularly in health science, in medical science. Public health may be more common than in dentistry or dental public health. But to the best of my knowledge, because I'm from dentistry, I'm from dental public health field of study, we still have a few qualitative research in our field of study. But the qualitative research is very important for and will contribute to knowledge in our field of study, because it will increase, or we can gain a deep understanding about health issue, about dental health issue, about why our intervention program never worked. You mean like dental caries in Indonesia is the prevalence is still the same as before, but the intervention program, we already run the program, we modify the program, we try to find something new, but the prevalence of dental caries, the behavior never changed. And we can do qualitative research to explore this problem. We should interview the individuals who perform that behavior, why they perform that behavior, and how they can change the behavior. And it will give, it will be more useful for us to conduct qualitative research. But I don't want to say here that the qualitative research will replace the quantitative research, because quantitative research and qualitative research has different aims, different purpose, and they have their own strength and weakness that they will complement each other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dini. And the next, please, your closing remarks, Professor.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else to add that Dini hasn't just said. I guess for all researchers, irrespective of method that people choose, I guess it's just about making sure that you've got an appropriate research question beginning, and then let that determine which methods you use, whether they be quantitative, qualitative, or mixed. You know, let your research question drive the research design or the research designs that you decide you want to use. I don't really have anything else to add, I don't think.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So this is the end of our sessions. We are really happy to have you here, Dr. Dini and also Professor Ward. Thank you very much to the speakers and also all the participants for these excellent sessions. Before we finish these sessions, I would like to share a certificate of appreciation to our speakers. As a token of appreciation from the committee, I would like to present the certificate for the first speakers. This is for Dr. Dini Setiawati. Thank you for your interesting presentation.
Thank you.
And the second is I would like to present the appreciation for Professor Ward. This is the certificate of appreciation from the committee. Thank you for your kind presentation, Professor.
Thank you.
Okay, before we finish this webinar, I would like to take a moment for a virtual commemorate photo. To all the participants, please switch on your camera and give us your best smile. Maybe Mbak Tere or Mas Bagus, may I ask your assistant, please? To take a virtual photo.
Oke, siap Bu Saka.
Okay, please to all participants, switch on your camera and we will take a picture together.
Oke.
Please give me a sign, Mbak Tere, if you already finished. Okay.
Okay, once again.
Okay.
Okay.
Done?
Sebentar Bu Saka, satu lagi nggih.
It's okay.
Karena pesertanya cukup banyak.
Yeah, so many participants today, so we should take a picture a lot of screen. So need a moment, please. Okay.
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 I think that's enough, Bu Saka.
Okay. Thank you again to everyone. See you all again soon and stay healthy, everyone. Have a nice day and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Dini.
Bye, Professor. Thank you.
Bye.
I would like to remind to all the participants to get the DA certificate. Please click link below at the chat room. So after you already fill the questionnaire, you will have an e-certificate in your email. And for the material of this webinar, you can see in YouTube channel of our webinar. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dini, and thank you, Mbak Tere and Mas Bagus for this assistance, and see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for your participation.